this is like this in business, people have a really bad relationship with money. As a financial advisor, I know that. You have to change their state before they change anything. In the old black and white movies when we were young, you'd have Humphrey Bogart with the actress, whoever it may be, and she'd be hysterical screaming, and Humphrey Bogart would slap her in the face. And in the moment she'd go, but he was changing her state. And you have to change people's states. You have to get people to a place where the shock or the fear or the anger or something makes them go, no.
Spencer, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
And many podcasts will look to start with childhood, but I want to fast forward a little touch after that. And I want to go to the early days in your sales career when you were selling office equipment. And I want to know what was happening during that period of time that shapes the man I get to talk to today.
I think a lot of us lean on our early experience and have fond memories of what that was like and the lessons we learned. And the reason that is because we all knew jack shit back then. Basically, we were all just beginners. And those lessons that we learned as a young professional person, we see them being applied later on in our life as well. And so that's why they resonate so much. But I think that I entered into an industry that's really competitive, but I didn't understand competition. So for any experienced person walking into that space, I'm sure they'd go, bloody hell, there's lots of companies doing the same thing. But back when I was young, it was just, I was taught a process, and it was very simple. It was like you knock on 100 doors, you make 100 cold calls, and out of that we'll teach you that there's opportunities. And if you do that repeatedly every day, that's what happens. And so much so that when my daughter started applying for jobs straight after university, I used a very similar process with her. It was like, right, I want you to apply for 30 jobs a day for the next month. So that's 30 jobs times 5. That's 150 a week. That's 600 over the course of the month. If you apply for 600 jobs, you're going to get a job. And I think that was exactly what was taught to me. It was understanding that you needed to go out there and understand rejection was part of the game. And I was taught that rejection was a positive thing, not a negative thing. And in sales, so many people struggle with rejection. They struggle with, fear of someone saying no. Whereas for me, being taught at 19 years old that you need no's, it's important you get no's. In fact, you're going to get more no's than you get yeses. So go look for them, and you'll only get a yes if you get enough no's. And so that was always taught to me that was the job. And so it then became something that was part of my job rather than, something that stopped me doing it. And every time I got a no, I just psychologically was in a place where I was like, well, I'm one step closer to a yes. So keep coming no's,
Do you think there's a number of reps and number of exposures to no's that people need to go through to understand that it's part of the process? Because I guess if I think about my own sales career and the people that I've worked with, I think there's a number of people I've worked with that have never almost had enough no's to be comfortable with getting a no, if you understand what I mean, Spencer.
Two things. Okay, first of all, I was taught to understand that no's are important. And the way that I was taught that is that my first day on the job, I was told to go and get 100 no's. And the second day on the job, I was told to go and get 100 no's. And so I remember going up to the boss at the end of the day, the first day, and he gave me a high five and he said, brilliant job, well done, 100 no's, perfect. And I went home, told my mum, and she's like, that's a bit weird. Second day, same thing, gave me a high five. Third day, same thing. Fourth day, he said, get me 99 no's today, get me one yes. Go and get 99 no's first, though. And so that rejection was being taught to me in a really structured format. Now, if we think about agreement and disagreement in life, how arrogant would you be if you thought that everybody was going to agree with you? That's the first thing. And we know in life that not everybody does agree with us. Different people have different opinions. So if we bring that into understanding sales, understanding not everyone's going to agree with you, that's the first thing. Secondly, what makes you think everybody's going to buy what you're selling? No matter what you're selling, why is everybody going to buy it? Whether you're a network marketer selling aloe vera or Kangen products, or whether you're an office equipment salesman selling photocopiers and fax machines as it was back then. Some people have a new photocopier, some people have a new fax or have a good photocopier and fax. Some people already use aloe vera, some people have already got a Kangen water machine or something similar. So what makes us think that everyone's going to say yes anyway? Surely not everyone is. But when we accept that, then we start to understand in much greater detail that no is important. And when you think about people that have had an equal number of no's to yeses, that's very unusual. And people that get more yeses than nos, that's highly unusual. If you're a car salesman and you've got people coming into your car showroom every day, everybody's coming in because there's some form of interest, but maybe they're comparing your BMW versus the Mercedes down the road or the Volkswagen down the road. And maybe they just want to give themselves peace of mind that the decision to buy the Volkswagen was a better decision. What makes you think it's like you? So I really deeply believe that if you're in sales, that you've got to focus on understanding that rejection is part of the game, and in fact, the majority of the game. And the only way you can reduce rejection is to get better yourself. And to get better yourself is not to get more arrogant or more confident. It's just to learn more skills, be a student of your craft, understand that sales is a profession just like anything else. And to be a really good salesman, you've got to understand all aspects of it and be constantly feeding yourself, not only the skills that have existed for many years, but the new tools and strategies that you can deploy through digital marketing and other strategies that exist nowadays.
Undoubtedly. And in terms of like sharpening the craft and becoming a better salesperson or just even a better individual, how important was the Early Bastards Club for you?
Oh man, that was amazing. That was again, even to this day, I find very few people have ever experienced that. But we had a guy called David Schillingus, and I write about him in my book because we would train at 6:15. So we'd get to the office at 6:15 a.m. and 16 of us were in this Early Bastard Club. And we used to go, Early Bastard Club, and rub our eyes as we walked in. And if you didn't come in at 6:15, he'd lock the door. So you knew it was there. But it was conditioning, every single day, like going to the gym. It's every single day you go in and you train, and we trained from 6:15 till 8. I think it was 8:30, and it was every day was a product, every day was sales pitch, every day was rejection, objections, scripts, different ways of looking at strategies, and everything was taught. But that repetition that happened every day, 5 days a week, and that went on for I think about 18 months, every single day, conditioned me to be or get the results that I've started to get towards the latter part of that period.
I think there's an exciting element to doing the work when others aren't doing it. And I actually saw you write a post recently about social media is always showing people on holiday or flexing or taking time off. And you quite candidly and openly said that you used to get a little bit of a kick out of doing the hard work when others weren't. And I think the Early Bastard Club is probably one of the first examples of that if you look at your career, Spencer.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I've been in Dubai for 18 years, and we have Ramadan. And Ramadan is a holy month where businesses close early. And that month changes throughout the year because it's once every 10 and a half months, I think it is. And so it comes forward. So it's not always through the summer or through Christmas, it's through the year. But people would say, oh, Ramadan, it's always quiet in Ramadan. It's always quiet in Ramadan. And that was always my best month. So what was I saying to myself? What story was I feeding to myself to make the toughest month for everybody else the most successful month for me? Looking for, putting that at the moment, people going on vacation right now. Oh, I'm on holiday, so everyone else is on holiday. And in Dubai, where it's really hot, a lot of the time, mums and kids leave for an extended period. But most people are delusional to think that CEOs of companies or CFOs of companies or CMOs go on holiday for 3 months. They don't. They all get their 4-6 weeks allowance per year. They take their holidays in various times of the year. There's people here. You just have to have the right mindset around it. And when you do, you then lean into it, and then you're able to look at others and be happy that they're off on their holidays because you're taking advantage of them not being around.
There's always stories that particularly salespeople tell themselves, like, oh, don't call on a Friday afternoon because you never get through on a Friday afternoon, or, oh, don't call on a Monday morning because people will be clearing their emails first thing. If you extrapolate that out, that leads to the whole holiday mindset that you're talking about there. So there's always stories that we can tell ourselves that maybe justify a lack of effort or a lack of results at a particular period of time.
Look, if you wanted to get hold of me, the best time to get hold of me is between 7 and 7:30 every morning. I will always answer my phone at that time of day. So what does that tell you? You can see me on socials. If you do any research on me, you'll see that I'm up and in the gym at 5 o'clock. I finish at the gym at 6:15, and I offer people the opportunity, if they want to talk to me, to come for a walk with me at 6:15 because I'll go for a walk. And everyone, that's free. People pay £1,000 an hour for my time, but that's free. But people are, oh, that's a bit early, isn't it? Oh, that's a bit early getting up like that. Don't know about that, Spence. And I think
you're filtering at that point, though, Spencer, aren't you? Like, if you aren't committed enough to come at this time in the morning, then maybe you don't really want my time, or you're not going to use the actual value that I'm going to give you.
Another example of that, yeah, you're spot on. Another example of that is people say, can I get some advice from you? I just need 15 minutes, a quick phone call. And I'm like, yeah, no problem at all. I charge £1,000 an hour. So 15 minutes is £250. And like, yeah, but I've only got one question. And I'm like, that's how I make my money. So what do you want, my time for free? You find that people generally don't want to pay if they just want an easy answer to an easy question and don't want to do the homework themselves.
I often think if you gave the time for free as well, they might not actually take action off the back of it because they've not got any skin in the game off the back of it. So if, for example, they have invested £250 to ask you this one question, and the insights that you share with them, they're much more likely to do something with it because they're like, look, I paid that money for that, so I need to get value from my investment. I need to get an ROI. I need to get a return on that investment. Whereas if you give it for free, there's water under the bridge. It doesn't really matter. In one ear, out the other, potentially.
Yeah, bang on. Exactly right.
So these early days in your sales career, you're learning about rejection. You're extremely comfortable with rejection. You see that throughout your time. The Early Bastard Club was prepping you to be a product expert, to be more confident, to be more skilled. What was it about sales that lit your fire and saw you be successful?
So first of all, when you understand how important sales is to a business, when you really learn how important it is, and a business with no sales makes no money, then you realize that your role is actually more critical than you think. But secondly, I think for me, it was like being in charge of how much money I earn. There's entrepreneurs and there's intrapreneurs. And if you're a salesman working for a company, then you're essentially an intrapreneur if you're on commission only. They provide the infrastructure, the legal structure, the processes and systems, products, and everything else. Being an intrapreneur, which is what I think most commission only salespeople are, you're in charge. So I've just come back from vacation for 2 weeks. Imagine if I had a salary, and let's say, I don't know, let's keep it simple. Let's say my salary was $10,000 a month. I have to live my whole life, plan everything around that salary. So that's my holidays, my kids' school fees, whatever medical I have, what car payments, my mortgage, whatever it is within that. And I find that really suffocating. It's like, so I sit next to somebody else at work. I work twice as hard as them, but they earn the same as me. I don't like that game. So being in sales has enabled me to be in charge of how much money I've earned, which meant that the harder I work, the better I can then allocate my finances to do whatever I want to do. But also, it ignited the competitive nature in me. And some of us are competitive at school and some not so. But being a winner it makes you feel good. Competing makes you feel good. Having a challenge makes you feel good. And so all of those things work for me within that commission-only sales environment. And so that's why I really got excited by it, and I'm still to this day.
I've heard you say before that there was an element of loneliness as a child. You weren't quite on the, like, in particular crowds. You were maybe on the periphery of certain groups in that regard. In a sales environment, I know from my own career, and I know many people listening, you do find an element of camaraderie, even if you are all on commission or all on different sliding scales of pay. You often do want the guy next to you to win as well, or you bounce off each other when you're doing a cold calling session. Oh, you'll never guess what this guy said to me, or you'll never guess what I've just closed this month. And there's an element of a bond in that sense. Was that something that you found an element of camaraderie in?
As a salesman, no. As a
Okay.
leader, yes. So as a salesman, I wanted to win, and so as long as it was ethical and honest, I wanted to win, and that was it. So you were my enemy. When I was running businesses and running sales teams, creating that mob mentality, creating a platoon, creating this gang, whatever you want to call it, this group of people where it was us against the rest of the world, enabled you to form bonds and relationships with people that you wouldn't normally. And that for me, I've got enormous joy out of over the years.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. How did your career progress then that led to you ending up in Hong Kong? Because you've just mentioned you've been in Dubai for 18 years, but I know Hong Kong was a stop off along the way.
So I've been in 10 countries. I was selling office equipment. I was earning 50 grand a year, more than most of my mates, doing well for myself, spending most of it, probably all of it. And I went for a job interview. And I went to a recruitment consultancy one day on Tottenham Court Road, what they call PMA recruitment. Doug Brain and John Celeste, two guys interviewed me. I said, look, I just want to earn more money. How do I do it? And they were like, franking machines. That's how you do it. Pitney Bowes. That's what you do. And I'm like, okay, never heard of it. What do I do? And they sent me for an interview selling franking machines. I didn't get the job. And I was like, well, I sell office equipment and I'm good at that. Why wouldn't they give me the job? And then he said, have you ever thought about going overseas? Have you ever thought about doing that? Well, I'd been overseas as a kid, so I wasn't fearful of it. And so they said, have you thought about financial services? And so I knew nothing, like nothing about financial services. I got a job interview, went for the interview. I was 23 years old. They rejected me because I was too young. They said, you need to be 25. I then found the CEO of the company, sat waiting in his reception area one day. And long story short, but his dad and my grandfather were in the same hospital at the same time. Both, one suffered a stroke, one a heart attack. And that connected us in that moment. And in that connection, he then said to me, you've got 2 weeks, get yourself sorted out. I need you in Hong Kong. And that's how that journey started. And I went to Hong Kong and learned about financial services. And again, didn't know anything. But my boss in Hong Kong gave me 9 books to read the day I arrived and said to me, don't come back to the office till you've read the books. And then you can tell me about them. So, God, it was a whole nother language, this financial language. It was just gobbledygook. It's gone from reading The Sun to reading the FT. It's like 2 different languages. But I learned and I got my head down and I learned, and then I started to make some sales. And then I realized it was a lot easier than selling office equipment by comparison. You know,
What was easier about it?
Nobody wants to buy a photocopier. There's nothing exciting about that, but everybody wants to get rich. And so if you can help people identify what they need to achieve and how they're going to get there, and then learning that they can't do it on their own, it made it a far more interesting job to be in. And most people don't know what to do with their money. Most people are badly organized financially. Most people have a really poor psychology around money. So teaching people how to be better with their money wasn't a difficult sale by comparison. And because I was hardworking and because I was good at it, and because I did what my boss told me to do and did exactly what he said without questioning it, I was able then to multiply that. And that's where I went from earning, I remember these numbers quite clearly. So I went from 50 grand a year in London to moving to the Far East, and I earned, I think, 138,000 in my first year there. It wasn't even a full year because I joined in February, and I was like, holy mother of God. And then the next year was something like 260. The next year was 300 and something. The next year was over 500,000. And that was when I won, the first year I won number one in this company. And that's because the guy that was always winning took December off, and I kept going in December for 2 weeks, and I beat him by that much. But that was then I was earning 500,000 a year, and then it went from 500,000 to 750 to 1 million to 3, 4, 5 million, and it kept going up. But I wasn't measuring the money. I wasn't motivated by the money. I was motivated by winning. So you needed to put me into a competitive space, in a competitive environment, and I had to beat somebody. And it was like that became my absolute 100% focus. It was like winning. You know, and you gave me the choice between earning £100,000 on winning or £200,000 on coming second. I'll take the £100,000 and winning all the time, because it meant something to me. It meant I'd achieved something.
That's incredibly interesting. Have you heard of a gentleman called Will Storr? He wrote a book called The Status Game.
Yes.
It was a gentleman I interviewed recently, and he's done a lot of the top podcasts as well. And it was fantastic to have him on. And that speaks exactly to that, because some of his research found that if you offered somebody a new job title or a salary increase, a lot of people would take the new job title because it has an element of status attached to it, whereas salary can be quite private behind the scenes. Equally, I'm not saying that you would have taken the better job title, but you were driven by the status of winning and being competitive and up against your peers, even if it meant that you maybe didn't earn as much revenue. So it's fascinating how the human mind works. Even somebody that's as high a performer as yourself was still like evolutionary driven in that same way of, let's try and achieve that win rather than a particular fiscal figure.
You know what? I've interviewed people in the past and offered them jobs with more money, with more opportunity, but with a lesser business title. And they've gone from, I don't know, sales manager, and they want to be a sales director, but the job stays set. And they're like, yeah, but I need to be sales director. I'm like, but you're not a director. And I'm like, you're going to earn twice as much money doing this. I know, but, and I'm like, what do you mean? It's your business card. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. And so then I went from that place to when I set up my company, I removed job titles from everyone's business cards. I was like, no one gets a job title. That's just nonsense, because you can call yourself whatever you want. It doesn't mean anything. Let's focus on winning. And so
that's a great way to remove that unnecessary competition around that, because at the end of the day it doesn't massively matter, albeit it's quite funny. Sometimes when I deal with external clients, it's more helpful to have a more senior title depending who you're dealing with, because they're like, oh, I'm dealing with the account director rather than I'm dealing with the BDM. And that's a snobbery that's on the customer side. But if internally you can remove those barriers, that's a really excellent piece of leadership, I suppose.
And it might have been by default, but it wasn't my intention. It was just like, get rid of this nonsense, because I thought it was nonsense. It was, to me, it's like, people want a job title. It's like, why? Why does it matter? We're all part of a team. We've all got a critical role to fill, no matter what your job is. Whether you're in business processing or accounts receivable, it doesn't matter. We're all critical here. So let's get rid of these job titles and let's just be a team.
It's interesting that your relationship with money was fairly strong, albeit you said you spent a lot of the 50k you were earning those early days, because I understand from your childhood that there was a bankruptcy in the family after your parents divorced, and I know that sometimes that can have a hangover in how somebody treats money, in terms of maybe a scarcity mindset or maybe a spendthrift mindset, or whatever extreme they might end up on. So how did you manage to work on your relationship with money when your numbers were going up so rapidly?
So the first thing is when the bankruptcy happened, I was 7, so I didn't really understand what it was. I knew that Dad went from speedboats and fancy cars and a nice house to a 1-bedroom flat above a plant hire shop. But it didn't significantly impact the 7-year-old in me. What did impact was the work ethic. So my mum was working 3 jobs, my dad was working really hard, trying to start again and build again. And I was exposed to that. And it wasn't told to me. It was just, I was surrounded by it. And I had this really strong woman in my mum who was going out there and trying to make it happen. And it taught me about hard work. And so I think that hard work was something that I learned about. Now, when it came to money, I mean, look, I've made millions of mistakes with money. And I think we all have. I got divorced after being married for 5 years, gave nearly everything away, had to start again when I was 31, almost with nothing. And it proved to me that if you had the right mentality, the right attitude, and the right work ethic, that you can build up whatever you want to build. Some of the most successful people in the world don't possess a lot of the things that we assume they do possess. They just have a ridiculous work ethic and a can-do attitude in their chosen area. And some people choose areas where you won't necessarily make as much money, and some people choose areas where you would. But not everybody is driven by money as well. And I think if you're driven by money, sometimes you think everybody should be. But money as a young person is a status thing. As an older person, even in my own friendship network, I'm probably the poor one out of the group. My friends are billionaires. And so when I hang around with them, it doesn't matter how much money I've got, whether it's 10, 50, 100, it doesn't matter, because they're billionaires. But the whole mindset around, if you want to be somebody and you want to achieve something, whatever that may be, if you apply the right technique and strategy and then the work ethic, then there is no doubt, if you work really hard, that you'll get there, because you will.
Being driven and understanding and taking lessons from a potentially traumatic experience like parents divorcing at a young age is something that's very, very healthy, and it's pushed you to work extremely hard, to build something from nothing, to be happy to start again. What do you think are some of the potential challenges with going through an experience like that at the age of 7?
Oh man, what are the challenges? Before the age of 7, you don't know a whole lot. Okay, at the age of 7, they say, some of these psychiatrists and specialists say that at the age of 7, it becomes kind of fundamental to our youth. Before the age of 7, I can remember learning to ride a bike. I can remember mum and dad arguing. I can remember hating Brussels sprouts and not being able to leave the table unless I ate them. I can remember going to my nan's house on a Saturday when my dad slept on the sofa and I would play Scrabble with my grandmother in the dining room, or I'd be in the garden with my grandfather. I don't remember much else. So my life kind of started when we had no money, because the time we did have money, I don't remember much of it. And so then the time we had no money, I had a sister with Asperger's, and so I was almost like an only child, and I had to keep myself busy. Mum was never home because she was always working. But I think that it was drilled into me that if you fail at school or you fail at university, then you'll fail in life. And I failed at school and I failed in university. Nothing would go in. It just went in and came out the other side. And so it was almost like, you're going to struggle now, you failed, okay, and you're probably not going to amount to much. And so that was almost like creating the underdog story inside of me, and subconsciously. And it was I'll show you. It was like, and when I got into sales, I realized I could be good at something, and being good at something gave me an enormous amount of confidence, and it made me believe in myself, and it made me realize that actually, as much as people in the UK hate salespeople very wrongly, which I don't like at all, most people that hate salespeople are idiots because they don't understand it. But that being able to do something and being good at it, and then being able to control the income that I made, just filled me with an enormous amount of belief that, you know what, the world was my oyster. Whereas previously it was like, you're probably going to fail, so just accept that.
Competence breeds confidence. Otherwise, if you have a huge array of, or a huge amount of confidence, it's almost illusion. But you're proving to yourself on a regular basis with your skill set that you're very, very capable. You're very able to apply yourself in a particular domain. So I find that extremely exciting in that regard. You mentioned just earlier about a divorce at a young age and having to start again. I understand 2012 was a series of challenging experiences in terms of your divorce, some big changes within the business world, some challenges with your back and your spine. What was happening in that period in time?
So I got divorced in 2003, I think. So much earlier I got divorced. So um, that was hellish to go through, as anyone that's ever had a divorce will go through. But it was a great weight off my shoulders once the divorce happened. In 2012, I had spinal surgery and spinal fusion surgery, and that operation after 6 months had failed. So that was a tough experience.
What led to you requiring surgery, Spencer? What happened to your spine?
I had sciatica. I was going backwards and forwards to the chiropractor for 2 years for sciatica, and eventually said, you need to go and get something called a microdiscectomy, which was a small operation, in fairness. And I met a surgeon in Dubai, and he was like, yeah, let's get it done today. And I shat myself, basically. I was like, well, hold on a minute. Not ready for that right now. And then I flew to London, and I saw 10 neurosurgeons and sat down with them, showed them my MRIs, and the basic decision was that I had a broken bone in my spine, I had a prolapsed disc, and I needed to have fusion surgery. And so, and I'd never had an operation in my life, so that was a big deal for me. And it was overwhelming. And the operation, again, 13 hours on an operating table, in hospital for 3 weeks, it was just, a different life for me. I'd never experienced anything like that. Took the wind out of my sails, lost my confidence. I couldn't stand up, I couldn't sit down, I couldn't move. Being a very active person, that was really challenging for me. So yeah, it got me down, and I was pretty disillusioned during that period, for sure. And so then what had happened is I'd been really successful, probably the most successful person in our industry. And I'd become cocky and arrogant, and I'd become, kind of unlikable, I would say. I was earning outrageous amounts of money. I was, admired or revered or hated by a large group of people. We built a very successful business. And I'd started to become a bit of a renegade, because, again, I need competition, and there was no competition because I was the best. And so whether that was running businesses, whether that was selling, whatever it was, I was winning everything. And so that competition started to fade away. And so I became a bit of a self-saboteur. So that happened. And with the business that I'd helped to build, we decided, or the CEO decided, it was time that I went. I agreed to take a year off in gardening leave because I needed to have the operation again. And so the second operation, the leaving the business that essentially my whole family were part of, because I didn't know anybody outside of the business. I'd lived in many countries. And then my partner at the time, she wanted a baby, and I didn't want any more kids. And so she left me. And so that happened 3 days, one after the other. And then that was just like me falling off a cliff, and I went into a very dark depression. And it was very, very ugly for a good period of time.
I think when you consider those three pretty life-changing or life-impactful events coming so close together that would test even the most resilient and robust of individuals. And the chemicals within your body, it's so fashionable to talk about chemical imbalances nowadays, but I think it's inevitable that your serotonin, your endorphins, your dopamine, everything would just be all over the place when you're on that kind of level of emotional roller coaster. And I know from hosting a gentleman called Dr. Stu McGill, who's like the back mechanic, he's known online. He speaks about the fact that back pain is probably one of the most debilitating challenges that you can have because of the ability to affect your movement, your mood, the level of pain doing even the most basic of tasks. And for somebody like yourself who prides himself on being highly capable in a sales role, to not be working on gardening leave, to not be mobile, and then of course to have a level of rejection from somebody that you've, I'm sure, spent a lot of time with and have deep affection for, inevitably you're going to end up in a very difficult place indeed.
Mm-hmm. You said it.
You would agree. I understand that your dad played a big role in you coming out of that, or at least not going through with the deepest, darkest thoughts that were in your head at that point in time. What was happening then?
So I decided that, and depression is from my own experience, depression is kind of a weird thing because anyone that's not been depressed or anyone that's been sad thinks that depression is being sad. And depression starts off as sadness, and then it becomes hopelessness, and then it becomes worthlessness. And when you get to a point where you feel you're of no value to anyone and everyone, and there isn't any benefit in you being around. So picture this, I've got two beautiful daughters. So my daughters, in my head, I was like, right, my ex-wife's remarried, her husband's a nice guy, so they've got a stepfather, they get on with him, so that's that box ticked. There's enough money, so they have money for the rest of their lives, so that's that box ticked. What do they need me for? They don't really need me for anything. So that's them, they're the priority. Second, I don't have a job, don't have any goals or focus or ambition, so I'm single. I don't like my life. I can't exercise, and so because of all the back surgery, and so I'm never going to be fit and healthy. So kind of like, what's the point of hanging around? You know, I might as well just go. And I got myself into a really calm state where I decided it was just time to go. And so I flew to the UK, went to see my girls. I also planned to go and see my girls to say goodbye to them. And my dad lives in a place called Sedgefield, which is south of Newcastle. He never comes to my house, ever comes to my house. And my routine was very simple. Every other weekend, I would fly to London to see the kids. And at Heathrow Airport, there was a driver pick me up, would drive me to my house. And it's a farm, so it's down a private lane. You can't see it from the road. It's a private estate. And on my driveway, my dad's car was there. And so I was like, what is his car doing here? He would have messaged me, surely. And I got my keys out of the bag, went inside the house. My dad was in the house. I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, hey, mate, what are you doing? So I'm in London. I thought I'd come say hi. And I was like, all right, cool. Now, how'd you get in? He said, the housekeeper let me in. So he said, go and have a shower. You just landed, I fly through the night. Go and have a shower. I'll make you some breakfast. And I've got a mate I want you to see as well, while I'm around. So I went and had a shower. I thought it was a bit weird. Had a bacon sandwich, jumped in the car with my dad. And he was talking to me about everything unrelated to anything I was thinking, the football, the tennis, whatever it might be. And he said, I've got a mate. I've got to go to Chelmsford. I've got to meet this mate of mine. I'd love you to meet him. I'm like, well, what does he do? He said, different things, but you'll get on with him well. So again, a bit strange, but he drove me to the Priory in Chelmsford and sat me down with a psychiatrist and got me, that psychiatrist over the course of a week, got me to understand what I was going through, why taking my own life wasn't the smartest thing to do, why leaving my daughters behind would cause them untold grief, misery, and suffering. And just in the space of that period of time, got me to understand that maybe it wasn't the right thing to do. And by the way, I'd had it all planned, so I won't go into detail with how it was planned, but I had it all planned. And he was the catalyst. Now, my dad, I'd not spoken to my dad in detail about it. What my dad knew, what my dad sensed, what my dad guessed, God and heaven only knows. But obviously, I'm very grateful that he did.
you've explored a lot of different topics on your podcast, and you've had a lot of different guests. And I think sometimes, particularly after almost 200 conversations on my podcast, I've certainly become more open-minded to things like timing, some sort of energy happening that's meant that your dad has been drawn to go to your house in London and say, I'm going to need to do something about this because something here just isn't quite right, even if it hadn't been verbalized. Because the way you were speaking so, unfortunately, rationally about, I'm single, my daughters and family are provided for, I don't have a job, I don't have a purpose, and purpose as a man is one of the most fundamental important things to keep us going and give us a mission to work towards. The way you're talking so rationally about that, and like you say, we don't need to get into the planning of how you would want to leave this earth, but it doesn't surprise me that that was your approach at that moment in time, because you didn't sound hysterical, which some people often associate with a suicide attempt. You were very much in your head and calm about what was going to transpire. But for your dad to intervene in that way, I mean, I think people that are going to hear some about the stuff that you're working on now, Spencer, will be very grateful indeed that that's what transpired.
I don't think suicidal people are hysterical. I don't think they're moping around. I think they get into a place, and whether that's a period of days, weeks, months, they get into a really calm place where you're not approaching it in a mindset of, oh, woe is me. You're just like, actually, there's no point in me being. I've got nothing to offer. It's kind of like it's not. It's not a dark place at that time. It's almost like a relief, because you've gone through the depression and you've got to the other side of the depression, and now it results in the suicide attempt or the suicide, and so that place that I think people get to, then most people aren't, and that's why they're successful at killing themselves most of the time, because it is a much calmer environment that they're in. The headspace is much calmer, and so jumping off the building, setting fire to themselves, taking the pill, slitting the wrists, whatever it might be, driving the car into a tree. All of those things, I believe, from the people I've spoken to and explored this with, have been very calm about. There are people that I know that have attempted to take their own lives, and in that state of mind, when they survived, were devastated that they survived, because that was a deeper, darker depression than actually going.
Yeah, it's very interesting. One of my very good friends who's been on the show a couple of times, Fergus Crawley, speaks really well on mental health, and he was saying he was just looking for quiet. He was just looking for a break from the noise. He didn't quite think that it was going to be the end of all things, but it was a break in the unpleasant existence that he was currently having, in the negative talk that was in his head. But it's a very emotive, powerful topic. But I'm glad that people like yourself can verbalize it so clearly and succinctly when it can be considered quite taboo by many individuals. But I don't want to fast forward too much, because obviously that was around 2012, but you've gone on to do so many interesting things, and of course you're been in Dubai for 18 years and built some fantastic businesses and had a tremendous impact across the board. But what maybe stands out during that period, before I maybe ask you a little bit more around some of the things that you're working on in present day?
What stands out since 2012?
Yes.
People, when I was a financial advisor years ago, if I met somebody, people used to say, what do you do for a living? And I used to look someone in the eye and I say, I stop people fucking up their finances. That was my response. And if I was in a more positive mood, I would say, I help people become millionaires. Because if you said you're a financial advisor, then people would go, meh, okay, not interested. And so that's what I would say. That would be my two strap lines. Since going on to building a number of businesses, I don't like the word entrepreneur. That doesn't fit well with me. And I'm also, I build businesses to a certain point and then I get out. All right. I move away because I'm not a very good businessman. And so when you look at the Blue Sky Thinking Group and all the companies underneath it, Safe Hands and Benepool and Finsbury Wealth and Finsbury Associates, when we look at those companies, they've been built by other people. Danielle, my business partner, is the opposite of me in many ways. She's detail focused. She's operationally brilliant. She knows how to take whatever I give her and do great things with it. My skill is I know how to find good people, and I know how to how to get the most out of people and give them. Danielle, when she started working for me, was 18 years old. Every promotion she got, she didn't want. She was terrified of the promotion, but I knew she was ready for it. And so every time she grew, she was, she stepped straight into it. Other people that have worked with me have been with me for a long time as well. And so I'm good at finding good people. I get bored very quickly. And because I get bored, I then have to focus on things that matter to me. And, when I started the sales training company, Make It Happen, back in 2016, I really wanted to train salespeople. I was really excited about that. I found it to be one of the most depressing jobs ever.
Why was that? Because when you speak about sales, you've got a real passion for it.
Because if I coach people or mentor people one-to-one, I have phenomenal results. When I go into companies, and this is where the big money is, when you go into companies and you train employees. So let's say there's a company with 100 salespeople. You go in there and you train every week, every month, whatever it may be. What happens is that you've got all of those people there, and you spoke about this earlier, where people are having skin in the game. If people aren't paying out of their own pockets, then what's their investment? Nothing. 80% of the people in the room aren't going to succeed anyway and don't want to succeed. 10% of the room are super motivated and polished and want to learn, and so they're there. And there's another 10% of the room that think they know it all, and there's nothing you can teach them. And so who are you really working with? And when you go and train sales, the truth is you shouldn't be training sales. You should be training sales leaders. You should be training sales managers. You should be training sales directors, and you should be training CEOs. Because at the end of the day, all they want is their sales team to perform. And the reason they're not performing is because of what they're doing, not the sales team. And so we look at the training of management. And again, the same thing. Why do people get put into management roles in sales companies? Well, that's because they're good at sales. They don't get.
It's something I've railed against. Yeah, I've railed against it so much during my career. I've been working in sales since 2014, and so often it's like, oh, we want you to take on these 3 new starts, Colin, and manage them. And I'm thinking, well, would you not just rather let me loose on bigger prospects, more prospects, different deals, different products that would allow me to excel in my environment, rather than spending time doing one-to-ones and micromanaging somebody's diary? Don't get me wrong, I do lots of coaching on how we structure our emails, how we structure our outbound, like what videos can we send on LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. That lights my fire. I love doing that. But actually sitting over somebody's shoulder and being like, and how many calls did you make today? And how many meetings have you got this week? That drives me up the wall. And you do see people promoted within a sales hierarchy that are great salespeople, but terrible managers.
You're absolutely right. But also you got to remember is that when I go in and train a salesman or a sales team, I'm doing the sales manager's job for them. So why do you want me to do that? Is your sales manager so bad that you need me to come in and do it? Why don't you train the sales manager? Because when I leave, he's got to follow through. And actually, how did you employ the sales manager? And do we need to look at your recruitment process, or do we need to look at you as the CEO? Because at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. What training have you got? And so, yeah, all of that. And it just I got a bit fed up with it, because there's lots of industries where they don't put a lot of time into recruiting quality people. They just want to fill desks up and seats up. And the real estate industry in Dubai is a great example of that. There's 62,000 real estate brokers, agents in Dubai. There's no country in the world that has, no city in the world that has that many. No city in the world has half that. And so just bums on seats. So I got a bit bored of that and just wasn't fulfilled by that at all. The one-to-one mentoring I got a great deal of joy out of, but I don't want to spend my time doing that all the time. So I work with only ever five clients at a time, and never any more than that. And then somebody asked me to do a podcast. I wasn't that keen on doing it. I pushed it back for about a year, started making some content, and then the podcast started to become interesting. And I think, I was 2 or 3 months in, and Tony Robbins agreed to come on the show. And once he was on the show, I was able to leverage Tony's name to get other people in that whole personal development space. And I really enjoyed that. Then I just by chance, I interviewed a guy called Nick Yaris. He was on death row for a crime he didn't commit, and his story mesmerized me. I then introduced Annika Lucas, who was sold into a paedophile ring by her mum when she was a kid, and that story mesmerized me. And I was just like, hold on a minute. There's some real stories out here of real people that have been through real suffering, and come out the other side. That to me is growth. That to me is achievement. That to me is development, not the guy standing on a stage telling everyone, buy my course because, you can learn to be great at something. And so the podcast evolved into that area. And that became something I really enjoyed. And I started to learn about people that suffered, and learning about suffering meant I got exposed to their emotions. And
I think that level of self-awareness, Spencer, is really refreshing, though, because look at your ability to pivot and maybe not just continue down a path for the sake of it because you're a quote-unquote expert in a particular field and you're maybe consigned or pigeonholed into that space. And like you said with your podcast, you're allowed to pivot based on your interests as a host because it keeps you showing up week to week. It keeps you showing up excited and refreshed. And if you look at my backlog, of course, there's been different areas of interest at particular times. Sometimes I've been like super into productivity, or I've been more fitness focused. I've been more money and investing focused, more business focused. And that's allowed as a host, and the audience can come on that journey with you. And I think you as a host with however many 100 episodes and some fantastic conversations, you earn the right to explore those interests based on what keeps you coming back as a host with the energy and precision and drive that you've got to have conversations that will benefit the listener that maybe they wouldn't have been open to if you hadn't maybe started off with a Tony Robbins, a Gary Vaynerchuk, a Stephen Bartlett, because you earn the right to move them towards areas that you think, oh, well, I know you guys are into your personal development. Here's some fantastic traditional personal development, but have you considered learning about these inspirational stories? Nick Yaris, who was on death row for a crime he didn't commit, and his story is absolutely mind-blowing. And I recently saw he was in the UK doing a few other podcasts again, which is cool to see him get over here. But yeah, I think you completely earn the right to help guide your listener down a slightly different avenue in your personal development just through the reps that you've done previously.
Yes and no. If you want to use the podcast as a business, you have to be careful of that. And so I think a lot of people get into podcasting, and the statistics. So 80% of podcasts never go past 20 episodes. And I think it's something like only 5% of podcasts go past 100. And so anybody that's committed to it, like you and I both have, we have not only committed our energy and our passions to it, we've committed a large amount of time, and whether that's interviewing, whether that's editing, or whatever it may be in the beginning, and the social media follow-up, you have to say the time that I use for that is that for my own mental well-being, number two, my own personal interest, or number three, am I going to make a business out of this? And I think that a lot of people don't understand that what a podcast can do for your personal brand and what it can do for your business. And I think that if people took the time to learn that, then they'd see that it was an incredible tool to be able to grow any form of business that exists, whether you and I were air traffic controllers working for a Heathrow airport, or whether we were both entrepreneurs out there building businesses in whichever field. And so I find podcasting fascinating. It's a wonderful prospecting tool. It's a wonderful way of engaging with people. But if you want to make a lot of money out of it, I think you need to be really strategic with it, rather than the mistakes I made, which was going down a certain path and then veering off again. And so as much as you want to have that freedom to do what you want to do, you always have to remember that your audience is who you're there to serve, as well as your guests.
Absolutely, Spencer. And I know you had some conversations, like you said, Annika Lucas, Nick Yaris, that guided you into an area that was a lot potentially darker and more unknown and unspoken about than it maybe should be. Who is Maria, and what role has she played in the life that you're living in 2023?
Maria Conciecel. So Maria I met. So I was part of something called the Global Sustainability Network, which was every Saturday. Now, bear in mind, back in then, Saturday was the Sunday so Friday and Saturday were the weekend in Dubai. They're not anymore. Every Saturday we would meet. And the Global Sustainability Network was focused on Goal 8 of the UN Global Sustainable Initiatives for the 2030 goals. So I would go, I would meet people, I'd be part of it. And there were various speakers that would come along. And it was only, there was 30 or 40 of us tops, and then a speaker would come and talk, and, we'd all be leaning over each other's shoulders to see the flip chart or the screen so that we could watch whatever they were presenting. And Maria Conciecel came in one day, and she had a couple of these young Bangladeshi girls with her, and she told this story about what she'd done. And I was blown away by her story. You know, this woman that was orphaned as a kid, brought up by another lady who was an orphan herself, then became a cleaner, then got a job for Emirates, then went to Bangladesh, to Dhaka, to the slums, spent 2 days in the slums and flew back to Dubai and sold her possessions to fly back to the slums to help one family. And then Googling, how do I raise money for charity, only to find that climbing Everest was the first thing that came up. And rather than any sane person on the planet going, oh, I'll skip that and I'll do a sponsored walk, she decides to train and climb Mount Everest. Bear in mind, the woman's never stepped foot in a gym in her life. She becomes the first Portuguese woman to climb Mount Everest. And when she tells the story about her psychology around it, that's what really attracted me. Because I said, look, Maria, Everest is the biggest mountain in the world. And she said, but is it? My mountain's bigger. And I was like, what do you mean by that? She said, this was an obstacle because it helped me raise money because I wanted to help these kids. And after raising that money, she then was able to build a very small school where she taught English in Bangladesh, or there was a lady that did that, so that when they spoke English, these children could come to Dubai and they could get scholarships. She was witnessing 12-year-old girls being married and raped by men 30 years old. You know, the moment they have their first period, they're married. And learning Maria's story for me just totally lost me in her sense of purpose and mission, and that for me was very attractive. I was very attracted to that. And then she said one day, do you want to meet some of the kids? And I met these 12 kids, and from the age of 8 till 12 years old. And, you know, I said, let's take them for an ice cream. She said, just be careful, Spencer. They've never had ice cream before. And I, what do you mean they've never had ice cream? She goes, they've never had ice cream. So I took them to the fun fair. They'd never seen that before. And then I went down to the hypermarket and took some trolleys. And I said, what can I get them? What do they need? And she just looked at me and she said, they need everything. And I'm like, well, where do we start? She says, at the beginning, they haven't got anything, Spencer. They have nothing. And I'm like, well, what do you mean nothing? She said, but just imagine nothing. They have nothing. The clothes that you can see them wearing are the only clothes they have. And so then started the journey of my relationship with these kids that I fell hopelessly in love with and wanted to try and help in any way I could. And it changed the way that I started to think about success and wealth and growth and purpose and selfishness versus selflessness. And decided I wanted to help. And so that's what I did. And I carried on trying to help. And then I interviewed a guy called Leon Logothetis on the podcast. I had a TV show called The Kindness Diaries. And at the end of the TV show, at the end of the podcast, I said, I'm jealous that you got a TV show and I don't. And he looked me back in the eye just as I'm looking at you right now. And he went, why don't you? And I had no answers to give him. And in that moment, he said, do you want some help? And I said, I'd love some help. He said, I'll meet you every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on Zoom. He was in LA. He said, I will have an hour with you for the next 6 weeks. And if I can help you, I will help you. But you have to make sure the hairs on my arms stand up. And if they do, then we'll see what we can do. So we brainstormed for a couple of weeks, some ideas together. And then on the third week, there was a Zoom filled with 6 other people. There were directors and producers and just these other people that were here to brainstorm and help.
It was time to pitch, yeah.
They were just there. They were there to help this idea come together. They all worked with Leon, so they'd heard about me, and so they came up with their creative ideas, and we brainstormed some more. And Sophia, who now works with me, and Stephen and Dre and all these other people, just incredible people. And they said, we'll do this, but, if you really want to move into the area of human trafficking, then, you've got to understand it's dangerous. It's scary, Spence. It's a bigger industry than drug dealing because children are sold over and over again. If we start to go down this path, beware. You might get death threats. Your family might get death threats. And I was like, no, let's go ahead. Let's make a documentary on this. Let's dive into this area. And Maria became one of the heroes within the documentary. And so that's where the relationship is with Maria now, along with 2 other incredible heroes, Hannah and Lena. And that's really, we're just doing the voiceovers at the moment for this documentary, and where my mind and my belief system and my heart has gone, and I don't care about money anymore, and I don't really give a shit. It's just not relevant to me. I have enough there is so much more on this planet. There is people that are so much more wealthier than anyone with hard cash or real money, because of what they try and do for others. And it taught me so many valuable lessons. And that's how I've got to the place I am now.
What is it about seeing that level of helplessness and destitution with the girls when Maria's telling you they have nothing but the clothes they stand up in that helps you realign your definition of success?
You feel ashamed. That's the first thing. Um, how could I'm ashamed for myself and I'm ashamed for the world, ashamed for my past of not knowing and doing more, ashamed that the world doesn't identify this. That desperation is something I see. But the reality is, as much as we talk about selflessness, one of the most selfish things I've ever done is helped those girls, because those girls were my recovery from depression. I took a massive benefit out of helping them. And every time I see them, I feel gratitude. Every time I'm with them, I feel grateful. And that as often as I see them, it's bang, an injection in my arm of I'm lucky. And we see this often in our lives where we see people that are less fortunate than ourselves, and it makes us realize how lucky we are. Get the opportunity to do that every couple of weeks. Bosh, in your arm. It's very
Perspective,
important.
isn't it?
Oh, hold on.
It's a little bit of perspective, Spencer, in terms of realizing that you are indeed very fortunate indeed. But I love the fact that you've just taken such massive action to help them. And until I started really researching for this interview that we had coming up, I didn't realize the scale and the size of it in terms of 8 million children trafficked worldwide. You're creating this documentary. Where do you start in terms of starting to help? You've had access to these 12 girls and the network that you're starting to build to support them. But what about people maybe listening to this conversation and feeling, oh God, I didn't realize it was like this?
I don't help 12, I help many more, but there are people out there that are doing great work. So Hannah Badi in Nepal, again, you have to bring awareness to people. Like I was made aware by being exposed. Other people, when they're exposed, you know, if you were in Dubai right now and I took you to see Maria and the kids and she told you her story, you would not go, oh, there, that's really sad, yeah, and get on a plane and go back. It would eat away at you. Okay. Now, maybe you wouldn't do anything with Maria and the girls, but you might identify in your own environment, your own community to do something. So it's always awareness. The documentary is about making people aware that Maria's from Portugal, the kids are from Bangladesh, Hannah is from Nepal. I mean, every child at the age of 9 in Hannah's community in Nepal becomes a prostitute. Anyone that's got a kid that's 9 years old, just imagine that. Your child becoming a prostitute. And that's life? No, that's not life. Lena from Bulgaria, 17 years old, fell in love with a handsome young man, someone that looks just like you, okay? And he dates her for 3 months, takes her on holiday to nice dinners, to the theatre. She has a wonderful experience. After 3 months, he says, do you think you might need to go get a job? You're living off me. She's like, yeah, you're probably right. He said, I think there's work at the hotel. She says, okay, I'll go to the hotel. I think there might be bar work there. He drives her there that night, puts her into one of the hotel rooms and says, the manager's coming, and we'll have a chat with him in a minute. I'll go and get him. And then he makes us have sex with 10 men that night. And every night for the next 3 years. Otherwise, he threatened he would kill her mum. And this is a 17-year-old girl in Europe. And then not only 3 years of doing that, she's then driven to Amsterdam and put into the red light district and made to have sex with men every day in the red light district. And if she doesn't have sex with 10 men, she gets beaten up. You can't, when you're exposed to this kind of stuff, you can't turn a blind eye. And if you do, you're a heartless soul. Because these people's suffering is so extreme and so raw that you're compelled to do something. And I'm just one person that having the ability and luckily the finances to be able to go out and do the research, employ a team, build a documentary series, and really try and do my little piece of getting people just to stop. And this is like this in business. People have a really bad relationship with money. As a financial advisor, I know that you have to change their state before they change anything. In the old black and white movies when we were young, you'd have Humphrey Bogart with the actress, whoever it may be, and she'd be hysterical screaming, and Humphrey Bogart would slap her in the face, and in the moment she'd go, but it was changing her state. And you have to change people's states. You have to get people to a place where the shock or the fear or the anger or something makes them go, no, can't tolerate this. I've got to try and do something.
You described it as an emotional shot in the arm when you see the girls, but when you tell those stories, it's an emotional shot in the arm to anyone that's listening to this through their car radio or their AirPods. And as you say, it is just such it's so, I mean, talking about 9-year-olds as prostitutes, it just makes your stomach turn, doesn't it? But you need to hear that level of unpleasant discussion to drive action thereafter, whether it's through anger, as you said, Spencer, whether it's through frustration, whether it's through upset. What would be some of the actions that you would advocate people to take if they were to take them off the back of listening to this?
So let's talk about human trafficking. Human trafficking takes place in every town and every city in the UK. There is no exception. It's happening there. Now, you may not see it, okay? You may be blind to it, you may be oblivious to it, but it's definitely taking place. So wherever you live, whatever town and city you're in the UK, or wherever else that may be, okay, is there a community that are doing something about it? Is there an organisation? Is there an NGO? Is there some form of charitable organisation doing something about helping people that are suffering or struggling? If there is, then go and talk to them and see what you can do. If you want to reach farther afield, I will gladly put you in touch with the organisations that I deal with myself. You're very welcome to reach out to me, and I can make introductions. If you want to come to Nepal and spend some time with the baddie people and see what my beautiful friend Hannah is doing to protect her community. I mean, while we were filming there, we met the president of the country. She promised to help while we were in the country. If you want to meet Lena and see the work that she's doing to see the women that are trafficked in the red light districts of many cities around the world, then you can do that. You've got to take a step. If you're in the car right now or you're listening to this, you can turn this off at the end of it and go, oh, that's really bad. Or you can say, you know what? I've got one afternoon a month that I can spend helping others. I've got one day a month I can contribute. Or you can just say, you know what? I'm going to try and be kind to somebody today. I'm going to go and find somebody I don't know, and I'm just going to be kind to them. I'm going to spend. That could be an old lady in an old people's home. That could be one of your neighbours that's not doing very well. Go and try and be kind, because I believe all of the problems of the world can be solved if we were just kind to one person. And if that happened, then I think we'd be more positive. I think we would look out for each other. I think we would fight for each other. And I think we would understand something that existed 100 years ago in a much bigger way than it does now. And that's just a sense of community and belonging.
I've actually had a number of conversations around the secular nature of society nowadays, and I don't have a religious faith myself, but certainly you mentioned there 100 years ago, we had a much greater sense of community because we prayed at the same church, we went to the same events, and we maybe had a little bit more like the whole love thy neighbor piece from Christianity. And that's not, I'm saying that as somebody who doesn't practice in that regard, but being kind to those around you was something that was more second nature in society than nowadays, where we're maybe head down looking at our phone, distracted by all the noise of the world, whether it's social media or news or excitatory power through our screens. So I think, Spencer, we've only really scratched the surface when it comes to the work that you're doing in that space, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you produce off the back of this. And your documentary, The Chain, you're doing the voiceovers just now. When is it going to be available, and where might people be able to find it?
So voiceover, I've been on holiday for 2 weeks. I've literally got the scripts here with me, and I've got to start filming doing the sound overs, the voiceovers, tonight and tomorrow. We'll be in a studio next week doing them against once they're rehearsed. We think that this will be ready by the end of August. If it is, the trouble we have with, we've done all of this for Netflix. The trouble you have is when you sell something to Netflix, once it goes to them, they then tell you when it can be delivered. So that it goes onto their schedule when they want. So you could wait 2 years before it goes onto their schedule, which isn't easy to deal with. Hulu and Discovery in conversation with us at the moment as well. So when it is ready, we will be able to tell everybody. Right now, I have only the trailer, which I'm happy to share with you and your audience, and they can see the trailer that we've created.
We can link it in the show notes, Spencer. But where would they be best placed to continue the conversation with you, to get updates and to understand what you're up to, and of course find your wonderful podcast as well?
I've got a name that sounds like an old people's home, so it's not hard to find me. Spencer Lodge. I mean, there's actually a hotel in New Zealand called Spencer Lodge in Rotorua. They got the website address. But I've got a name that's an old people's home. So if you've got to Google me or go to Instagram, Spencer Lodge, or go anywhere, go to any podcast platform, you'll find the Spencer Lodge podcast. If you want to really reach out with me and you really want to do something, and you really want to make a difference, and you really want to learn, and see some of the suffering that I've been exposed to, then I look, just reach out to me, and I'll make sure I put you in touch with all the right people.
Spencer, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to you, the listener. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.